Do you dream about being a professional writer? You probably do, right? We all do. But what I want to discuss today is why I think you should shoot for being an amateur and not a professional.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante. I'm a women's fiction writer, and I also give you writing tips here on YouTube on Fridays. Okay, so let's talk about this idea of amateur versus professional. And why am I talking about this? I'm reading The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Now, this book came out back in 2002. I never got around to reading it. And then recently my husband asked me what I wanted for my anniversary. And I decided that I would just tell him I want this book, which of course is, not really, your typical anniversary present. But I didn't really want anything else. And I thought, I really want to read this book. So he did. He bought it for me, along with some other things, of course. But I started reading it, and there's this one chapter that is about this, about amateur versus professional. And I don't want to misquote, so I will tell you what Pressfield says. He says that you should not be an amateur, right? So this is what he's he's not hinting at it, he's basically saying in this chapter. Because he says the amateur plays for fun, the professional plays for keeps. To the amateur, the game is an avocation. To the pro, it's a vocation. The amateur plays part-time, and the professional plays full-time. The amateur is a weekend warrior, and a professional is there 7 days a week. So then he explains, kind of like the root of the word, amateur, which is actually to love, which makes sense to me because, I speak Spanish, and amad, right, comes from that root of to love, same as amateur. Okay, so this bothered me. And why did it bother me? Because I started to think about what he was saying, and at least when I read a book, especially about craft, I start to, I think about it and I question it, and I want to see if I agree with it. I don't just want to read it and just let it go over my head, or just or believe everything or accept everything. I think about it and I think, well, does this make sense? Do I really agree with this? Now, I get what he's saying, because the whole book is really about resistance, right? Why we resist writing, why we resist creating art, and a lot of it has to do with us being afraid. We fear creativity, we fear change, we have a lot of fear. And so that the way that we deal with it is through resistance. We resist doing the art because we have this fear that's inside of us. And I get that, I agree with that actually. But what I don't agree with is that an amateur doesn't love the art, or isn't as dedicated to the art as the professional. And I'll explain why I feel this way. And I'm also going to argue that you should keep that heart and spirit of an amateur throughout your life, even when you become this professional. So it's not that I'm saying that you shouldn't aim to be a professional writer or a full-time writer. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is that I've seen a lot of professional writers or full-time writers that end up losing that love and that spirit of when they were an amateur. So when they were just starting out, and they loved just writing, and they loved creating stories, and they loved the whole art of it, not so much the business of it. Because what happens when you become a professional writer is that a lot of times you're focused more on the business and the marketing and the making sure that the book is successful and finding readers and all of that, instead of where you started, which is the love of the story. Okay, and then another issue that I have with what he's saying is that he's making the assumption that the amateur writer doesn't want to be a full-time writer, that they're a part-time writer because they want to be a part-time writer, and they're not taking the craft seriously. Where most of the time what I see is that writers that are not full-time writers, that they're not making a living with writing, is that they're actually very dedicated to being writers. They are just working full time and they're writing part time because they have to, right? This is just what they have to do in order to be able to survive, in order to be able to pay their bills. So to assume that the part-time writer is resisting, it doesn't really fly for me, because I don't believe it's true. I believe that it may be true for some people, but I think the people who really care about writing and really want to write and really are dedicated to writing a book, even if they only have a half hour a day, let's say, to write, they're still they're still professional writers, right? They're still serious writers. They're just doing what they can with the time that they have. So when he talks about a vocation, vocation is usually somebody's main employment, right? It's what they do. And it's not necessarily that the part-time writer doesn't want to make it their full-time job, doesn't want it to be their vocation. It's just that, like I said, they may be just having to work at a different job, do something else as they're building their career as a writer, or as they are completing their first book. And they are probably just as dedicated, maybe even more dedicated than a professional. It's just that they don't have the luxury of being able to make it a vocation yet, because they have to have a different job. So I wrote my own definition of an amateur, and I'm going to read it to you. Okay, so for me, an amateur pursues their art because they love it. An amateur works tirelessly for little or no money because they enjoy the craft of writing. They enjoy creating art. An amateur works tirelessly for their craft for no money because they love the art of writing. An amateur is a weekend warrior and an early morning or a late night warrior because that is the only time that she has, and she gives up other activities to write and to be creative. But most of all, an amateur loves writing. And again, the root word of amateur is love, and they love writing. That's why they do it. That's why they spend probably the only free time they have writing. So when I say I want you to continue to be an amateur and not a professional, again, it's not that I'm saying I don't want you to write full time, or I don't want you to become a published author and all of that. Obviously, if that is your goal, that's what you should do. But I don't want you to ever give up that amateur spirit, because I think that's what keeps you writing, and that's what makes your stories good, and that's that's the whole point of being a writer, is being able to love what you're doing and take the time to make that story as good as it can be. So if you've read this book, you might be saying, well, hold on, because Pressfield wasn't really talking about being a published author. What he was talking about is the attitude, right? The attitude of being serious about your writing, of not letting resistance stop you, of giving your full attention to your art and to your craft. I get that, okay? And I'm looking at it also as the attitude, but it's the attitude towards success. So what I'm saying is that it's the attitude and the spirit of the amateur that actually helps you to become a professional. It's that love of your work, it's that dedication to your work, it's that working part-time, it's that putting in the effort, it's that writing for free because nobody's paying you, that eventually leads you to become the professional that you might want to be, right? That you're striving to become. So that way, when you do become a professional, when you do become a published writer, you can still remember, right? I need to continue to have that spirit of the amateur. I need to continue to love my writing, and not just write because I have a contract that I have an obligation to. You're going to want to do that, but that shouldn't be the motivation. It should be that you're doing it because of the love of writing, because of the love of creating something, because of the love of being with your characters, and of finishing a project that's as large as a novel, right? It's a big project. And because of the love that you have for that project, you actually are able to complete it. And that's what you should go into publish. So when you are a published writer, when you are a professional, you don't want to forget that. You want to keep going back to saying, well, okay, I still want to have that amateur spirit. I don't want to give that up for anything. And I know that I've read books that from longtime writers that I've liked, and as the years go by, sometimes I feel like, did they really have the love for this story that they did when I first read the first few books? And sometimes I feel like maybe no, right? And maybe that love for writing, or that excitement, or I don't know what it is, that it seems to be gone because the story itself doesn't have the life and the energy that those first books did. So for me, I want to remain an amateur. Even though I consider myself a professional writer, I still want to carry forward that spirit of an amateur because I want to always love what I'm writing. I always want to be excited about what I'm writing. So this is a short video. I just wanted you to think about that. It just made me think when I read his chapter that, you know, a lot of times we think we want to be a professional, and his definition just didn't hit me as something that I actually wanted to embrace. I want to be a professional, but I also want to have that spirit of an amateur, because I think that that is what makes the stories come to life for me and for the readers. So hopefully that gave you something to think about, and you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button, so that you will know next week when my next video goes up. And I will see you then. Bye-bye.